Chapter 4, Monday, 1:30 p.m. Questions. Is that why you're paying me a visit? Okay, yeah, I'm back in the business, as you call it. Only now the business is filling vending machines, remember? It's night work, so I work part-time at the golf course. Yeah, well, after Nikki shot me, no one seemed very interested in me anymore. Gee, hard to believe, isn't it? Best in the business and all that crap. Can't figure it out. Still know my shit, have the reputation and know everyone from big tech to industry to the government. Oh yeah, I remember why now. I'm fucking dead. I mean, who wants a dead guy? Excuse me, I forgot that you work for the government. Still, for your information, dead is not the same as brain dead. Dead means you don't fucking exist anymore. I had launched the offense deliberately, but all of it was true. Feeling my anger build and wanting to at least remain cool on the inside, I finished the bottle, reached back into the refrigerator, and pulled out 3 bottles of derivation blend. Larry looked at Riley. Riley politely shook her head no, and Larry rolled his eyes as he shook his head. He knew how hard it was to find that. Riley motioned to the monitor and said, "So, you use all this to keep track of your candy bars?" I took a deep breath and returned their 2 bottles to the refrigerator. I didn't want to talk about my old life, what I had lost and why, especially why. I needed to hold on long enough to keep my promise to Gabriella. I gave Riley a small, apologetic smile. When I kept the smile small, it looked more like a smile than a sneer. Sorry, in case Larry didn't tell you, I was on your side. As in, not a fucking witness, but a contractor. And you don't seem in a hurry to arrest the son of a bitch who killed my wife and tried to kill me. My hobbies are none of your damn business. Not returning the smile, her eyes marble hard, she replied, Maybe, maybe not. You were an expert in something called honey traps. I took a sip of beer to allow Larry to explain, but he was no longer in the mood for conversation. He gave Riley a nasty look, sat back down on the couch, and picked up his magazine. She damn well knew what a honey trap was. I sighed and said, Fine, we'll do it your way. Honey traps are places where you store fake data or data you don't care about for the hacker to find. You want them to find and work at extracting it while you trace them. If they stay in a honey trap long enough, you can track them down, I said. And apparently you were very good at this, Riley said. Yes, I helped invent the idea. And yeah, there were people, some in your organization, that thought so. Witness protection used to take hacking pretty seriously. I suppose they still do. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Larry looking at me over his magazine. Riley raised her eyebrows and said, In fact, they still are being hacked. I raised one eyebrow to show her how it's done and replied, Somebody always is. She shook her head and said, But not with intelligent agents, which might be happening across the government. Deputy, that's been happening for a long time. You're just finding out about it? Really? Is that why you're here, to ask for my help? She looked back at the movie on the screen, and I saw her looking at my reflection on the screen. Our eyes met. Without turning her head, she said, Maybe. Maybe we just want to know what you've been up to lately. You've moved to a neighborhood where it is a little difficult to protect you. Or keep track of me? Yeah, the folks around here do value their privacy more than most. Look, enough of the bullshit. You guys can't really think I have anything to do with AI-driven hacking. She turned her head to look at me directly and asked, Why not? You're considered, or were considered, one of the world's best. I shook my head and didn't try to keep the condescending tone from my voice. Because, Deputy Montoya, can I just call you Riley? Thanks. It takes a lot of data, a hell of a lot of data, and some very serious horsepower to build even one intelligent agent. And it requires multiple neural networks, all trained to handle specific situations, working in tandem under constant human control. It's only a game that government agencies like the NSA and high-tech companies can play. You can't even buy that level of horsepower without getting noticed, even if you have the money and resources. So no, I don't have anything to do with it. Come on. They didn't send marshals here to ask me about cybersecurity. That's not how I'd get checked out. So why are you really here? She moved the misbehaving strand of hair out of her eyes. My eyes followed her little finger, and then I looked away. I could feel her looking at me quizzically. Her voice seemed slightly puzzled when she replied. You're right. Someone suggested that while I'm here I ask some questions. And no, just for the record, they know you're not involved in the attacks. It's too big for anything other than state-sponsored, and a big state at that. Something in her voice said, wait for it. So I did. Of course, that doesn't mean you aren't involved in some good old-fashioned hacking on your own, she finally said. I felt myself relax. Granted, getting convicted of hacking into federal computers probably put me behind bars longer than taking Kaufman off the board. However, while I was new to the hitman business, cybersecurity had been my life. I had trained the teams to go after hackers, and this wasn't how it was done. Someone higher up was dotting the I's, crossing the T's, to have something to show for their lack of success. And who would I be hacking? Or better yet, why? I asked. Larry looked at me over his magazine. Justice and FBI. They think you're trying to find out where Nikki is holed up. The dirty look Riley gave him confirmed he was telling the truth. He went back to reading his magazine. I shook my head in disgust. Hold up. Wait a second, don't tell me. You fuckers lost him? I said, my voice cracking. We didn't say that, Riley replied in a calming voice. The non-defensive calming voice is something they teach marshals because it works. And it works best when a hand is casually placed on the Glock on the hip, as she was doing. I didn't need the hint, and a part of me wanted to take the easy way out, make her pull and use it. I might have, if the end hadn't been so damn near anyway. Besides, I was just venting about something I already knew. I told myself that at least she hadn't said, trust me. Riley added, trust me, we can have Nikki anytime we want. Who we and you really want is the man who tells Nikki who to kill, Dragna. The sad part was that I did believe her. I just didn't trust her or agree with her. I shook my head. All you guys care about is Dragna because he's the big fish. Catch him and someone gets on TV, then runs for office. The asshole I want is Nikki. Dale, if you ever find Nikki, he'll put you down without breaking a sweat, Larry said, without taking his eyes from his magazine. Not to mention the little problem that hacking is illegal, especially into secure federal systems, Riley added. And why would I hack into your systems to find Nikki? Because you think we know where he is, she replied. I know you know where he is. Look, you want Dragna? Let me take my chances with Nikki. And what, you'll stop hacking into Homeland systems? I'm sure the FBI will be glad to hear that, Riley replied. I shrugged. Oh, I get it. Now that you're all under Homeland Security, the marshals are the errand boys and girls. Do you get the FBI boys their coffee when you're in the office? Just wondering. Riley took the bait, and her eyes met mine with a cop's flat stare. Then they darted at Larry, when he gave what sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. I growled. Now, why are you here? Riley snarled back. Have you ever heard of Tom Horn? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Larry watching me over his magazine. This was why they were in my living room. Shit. The question was whether they were here to arrest me or protect me. I replied, who hasn't? Her eyes widened. She had asked for effect, not expecting an answer. Larry said, I haven't either. Who's Horn? Riley shot him a look that would sear the flesh off today's boys. Larry ignored his flesh wounds like a real man and looked back at her, puzzled. After a lifetime of chasing miscreants, Larry had more moves than sea murder. And his good old boy act hid a lot of savvy. But he wasn't putting on a show for my sake. There was no point. Larry wasn't in the loop as a contractor, and I watched as he mulled over whether or not to be pissed off about it. Because he and I had history, it did piss me off a little, so I talked directly to Larry. When you're raised in southern Wyoming, you can't grow up without learning about Tom Horn. He was one of the Army scouts who helped capture Geronimo. You know, the Apache chief? But that's not what made him famous. The Army had lots of scouts. It was after the Army relocated the Apache to Florida he became famous. The big cattle companies hired Horn to terrorize homesteaders off their land. They say he killed over 17 men who were rustlers. Basically, he was a hitman. They hung him for killing a homesteader's 14-year-old boy. Many people think he was framed by the men who hired him. He drank too much, and when he drank too much, He talked too much. When they hung him in Cheyenne, Wyoming, it was a big deal. They say that there were Gatling guns on the courthouse roof in case his friends tried to rescue him. However, that wasn't the part about him I always found most interesting. I paused until Larry cautiously nodded. Not wanting to be overly rude, I raised an eyebrow at Riley, who gave up an almost imperceptible shrug. I continued lecturing. You know what he did to scare folks away? The Old West movies tend to ignore that the homesteaders were often Civil War veterans from both sides. They were war veterans, dangerous guys, legally building lives on government land. I mean, how do you scare guys like that? Both shook their heads. I had them where I wanted them. Horn would find a spot overlooking the homestead, maybe build a little fire, leave some food around like he'd spent serious time waiting for his chance. Who can plow a field, fix a fence, or do any damn thing wondering if there is a man, a dead shot, watching through the receiver sights of a buffalo rifle? Sometimes he watched and then killed, but mostly he just staged the scene before moving to the next homestead. They think they know about how many people he killed, but no one has any idea how many he scared out of the rich men's cattle country. Anyway, he was damn good at it for a long time. You guys can see the interesting part of this, right? Riley and Larry glanced at each other, then back to me. I smiled and said, "Come on, you don't see it? They hanged him. We don't hang guys like him anymore. If he lived today with all he knew about his bosses, he'd be in witness protection." Larry barked a short laugh, shook his head, and wagged a finger at me. Riley's eyes glinted, and I knew it was game on. Only, what game? I stepped past her to the refrigerator for another beer. Larry hissed, "Riley, 3 guys are looking over our vehicle. Damn it, I told you this bullshit could wait." Riley joined Larry at the front window. Her eyes narrowed when I told the game to shut down. I smiled back, shrugged, and celebrated with a long swallow, one celebration leading to another. Riley shook her head and turned around to resume the tactical analysis. "Actually, Larry, you didn't say a damn thing. I think they're just locals. Maybe just thinking about jacking the car." "Yeah, Riley, I did say something. At least 2 of them are carrying." "Maybe, but hell, probably everyone in this neighborhood carries." "Lerner, I told you to stay put." "Actually, Larry, you didn't. Those are just kids from down the street, for Christ's sakes." I finished my beer and stepped out my front door onto the porch, blinking into what passes for sunshine in St. Louis. I lifted a hand to the kids on the sidewalk. Both gave me indifferent chin waves. Chuck and John returned to live with their mother after living off the government for 6 years. They still blamed each other for getting caught before getting a block from the liquor store. I didn't recognize the third man standing slightly apart from the brothers and angrily sucking on a cigarette. Blue prison tats covered his pumped-up body, and I thought I could make out 2 teardrop tats under his left eye. Either he had pulled some serious time, committed murder, or both. He sucked in another lungful of smoke, gave me a flat stare, and flicked the burning cigarette against the marshal's SUV. With a small shower of sparks, it bounced back between his feet. He glared at me, the smoke trickling from his nostrils. When I smiled, he slowly bent, retrieved the smoldering butt, and slowly crushed it out against the side of the SUV. Then he stared at me, waiting for me to respond. Since his arms were the size of my thighs, he was in for a long wait. I knew it wasn't personal, and besides, he wasn't using my car for an ashtray. I hadn't seen him around, so he probably just got out of stir. He was back on the street, and everyone needed to know he didn't give a damn about the feds or me. Why me? Probably it was my face. The scars white and twisted on one side, pulling my mouth down and turning my smile into a sneer. For some like him, it was a challenge. The hell of it was there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. I sighed and looked at John, who rolled his eyes and shrugged. John, who had never touched a horse, was jockey-sized and knew better than to take sides. Half again taller and a third as bright, his brother Chuck watched with anticipation. I came to hide in a place where random and meaningless violence was a fact of life. I took it in stride, slipping, sliding, and bluffing my way around most of it. I knew what to do when all else failed because I grew up in the small towns on Wyoming's high, empty plains, where many of the same rules applied. I growled in frustration because I didn't have time for a guy coming home. I had enough problems. Irritated and angry, I turned to go back inside and think it over. Larry hard-shouldered past me as Riley slipped around on the other side, putting themselves between me and a threat. Witness protection. 1 minute grilled, and the next protected. I almost went back inside and locked the door. Instead, I stayed, changing my life in ways I never imagined. Larry, the protector, tipped his hat back and said, "Hey guys, how's it going?" I hid a smile, suspecting Larry had practiced the hat tip in the mirror. Some pull it down low and hard. Guys like Larry tip it back. Chuck, grinning, replied, "Cuz, look at this dude, a real cowboy. Man, that tie is cool. See you strapped. So what are you, like a sheriff?" Larry kept his face expressionless, and Chuck turned to charm Riley. "How about you, sweet lips? You a sheriff too? What you got? A deuce-deuce?" Riley ignored him and kept her eyes on the man by the car who was killing himself by lighting up another cigarette. Maybe bouncing them off cars before they were half smoked was his way of trying to quit. She put her hands on her hips, pulling her jacket away from her weapon. It wasn't a deuce-deuce, a small caliber .22, like what I used for rabbit hunting as a kid. Her Glock was made for only one reason, to kill people. Chuck, the comedian, enjoyed being the center of attention. Saving the best for last, he turned his wit on me. "Scarface, what the fuck do you do, boy? Steal golf balls off the course when you was mowing the grass?" I shook my head. Chuck is a bad man, but not a bad guy. I quickly erased my smile, not wanting my sneer to attract personal attention from the man in the street who was abusing government vehicles. Raising my eyebrows at Chuck, I tried to warn him off. Then I shifted to his brother, who raised an eyebrow in sympathy, but not his voice to help. I didn't blame him. Siding with the man, even a little, could be a death sentence in this world. Larry coughed to get attention and said, "Glad you like my tie. I can tell you where I got it. We're here to talk to Mr. Lerner about some things. Just Mr. Lerner." Chuck, glad to finally get a response from the audience, grinned as he looked over his shoulder for applause. His brother gave him an almost imperceptible shake of the head, but the vandal by the SUV grinned, which was all Chuck needed. "Oh, well, of course, we always help 5-0, especially cowboys. But ain't you supposed to, show us your badge or something? How do we know you're not just some dudes jumping into our shit?" Larry and Riley flipped open their wallets with their left hands and flashed the badges. Then, as they slipped their badges back into their pockets with their left hand, they moved their right to rest on their holstered weapons. As if on a dance floor, Riley slid her feet to squarely face the brothers, as Larry took a sideways step to get a better angle on the smoker. When Larry spoke, his voice was as amicable as his eyes were hard. "Now, dudes, move the fuck away from our vehicle." Chuck smirked. "Hey, man, it's on the streets, and we ain't doing nothing." John, the quiet one, proved what his uncle told me. He didn't get dropped on his head in the delivery room, and Chuck was definitely the reason they got caught and did time. He tapped his brother on the shoulder and said, "Chuck, man, they're like marshals, like feds, you know?" Took a moment to sink into Chuck's damaged cortex, but finally he flashed a smile at me and chortled, "Marshals? Man, that's cool. Scarface, so you, robbed a bank or something?" His eyes kept darting back to Riley, and when he finished talking, he looked slowly, insolently, up and down her body. His brother muttered, "That's the FBI, Chuck. Marshals, man. The dude is, protected. You remember? The marshals?" With what was, for him, inhuman effort, Chuck slowly pulled his eyes from Riley to look back at me. I didn't blame him when he looked back at Riley. Then something clicked, and Chuck's eyes narrowed. His brother looked at me and shook his head. John often told Chuck that someday Chuck would get popped if he didn't cut his bullshit. But Chuck lived for these moments, and his hand darted behind his back. Knowing what was always in his back pocket, I grabbed Riley's shoulders to pull her out of the way and save Chuck's life. She was fast, faster than Chuck, and much quicker than Larry, the slow-draw cowboy. I threw her off balance as Chuck ripped his cell phone from his back pocket and held it up in front of him. Then Riley stepped in front of me, her Glock leveled at him. Chuck didn't move. He aimed his cell phone at us with frightening indifference, ignoring the woman pointing a semi-automatic pistol at his head. For many, the cell phone screen is an alternate universe, and Chuck was a one universe at a time kind of guy. and a much bigger moron than I had realized. The man on the street vanished behind the SUV. Larry, his weapon finally drawn, stepped forward. He yelled at John, "On your knees, asshole! Down! On your knees! You, behind the vehicle, come out and show me your hands!" John immediately dropped to his knees. Then, without being ordered, he stretched out on the hot concrete, his hands spread apart and his face down. Chuck kept recording. The man behind the SUV didn't show his hands, face, or any other part of his body. Larry glanced at Riley, who nodded. Keeping his weapon pointed at the SUV, Larry slowly worked his way around to the hidden smoker. Obligingly, a smoldering butt bounced out from behind the back tires. Larry adjusted his approach. Riley, her lips in a tight line, gave Chuck and John turns looking down the barrel of her Glock. Larry continued to move like a big cat stalking its prey. I wondered what the hell he was thinking. If the smoker behind the SUV popped up with a MAC-10, Larry would be seriously outgunned. Then I decided to hell with Larry. I was unarmed and standing in the open. I looked down at John, lying flat on the concrete, wondering if I could throw myself beside the little bastard and pull him over my head when the bullets started flying. Then Chuck, the moron, brought it all to an end. He lowered his phone, fiddling with it, obviously replaying his mini-production. Glancing up at Riley and me, he smiled and lowered his head to watch it again. Riley shifted her feet to keep the real danger in her peripheral vision, the smoker behind her company car. Another lit cigarette, this one barely smoked, arced out from behind the vehicle's rear. Larry swung a little wider to get a better angle on the rear of the vehicle. I watched the vehicle's front, giving the smoker a little more credit. People began gathering on their porches and in the yards down the street. Riley and Larry weren't street cops with radios, nor were they being tracked by dispatch. As if hearing the voice in my head, Riley, her voice low and tense, said, "Lerner, call 911. I whispered back, "My cell phone is in the house." "Well, go inside and call, then stay there." I hesitated, reluctant to leave her alone with Chuck for his sake. Riley hissed, "Go!" Before I could move, Chuck nodded at his phone with approval and slipped it into his shirt pocket. With unfeigned casualness, he said, "Later, Scarface. Come on, John, you chicken shit. Hey, Lewis, quit jerking off. We gotta go. I gotta do some sweetening on this. Y'all gonna love it, man. Telling you, this is one of my best yet. Stay where you are. You're not going anywhere. On your knees. Now." Riley snapped over the barrel of her Glock. She scared me, and I was behind her. To my amazement, Chuck smiled, and John, keeping his hands in the air, slowly rose to his feet. More young men and a few young women appeared on porches and started edging towards the street. "On your knees! I told you to get the fuck down!" Riley yelled. Larry barked similar demands at Lewis, who finally came out from behind the SUV, his shirt unbuttoned. He raised his shirt with his fingertips and slowly turned to show he wasn't armed. Ignoring Larry's repeated commands to get on his knees, Lewis began backing down the street towards a growing crowd with his hands raised. As he backed up, he flexed his hard, lean body, starting with the deltoids and continuing down to his six-pack abs. Lewis finished with rhythmic pelvic thrusts that were symbolic given the obvious steroid use. Then he restarted, taking it from the top. Larry followed him, continuing to bark orders until they came level with us. John and Chuck joined the strongman nicotine addict, and all three slowly walked backward, hands raised, as a growing army sauntered up from behind to join them. Many of them had phones in their hands, something I hoped my protection detail noticed. Larry lowered his weapon, but kept it in his hands as he walked back to us. Either he saw the phones or decided there were too many to shoot. Knowing Larry, he simply decided he didn't have enough ammunition. His face was red with rage and embarrassment. "Can you believe this?" he snarled. Chuck stopped in the street and waited for his crew to get to him. He yelled at me, "Hey, Scarface, don't forget to call Uncle Al. You know better than to fuck with him. My games and shit better keep working on my big screen. That means all of the channels." He glanced behind him and added, "That goes for all of us. Don't even think of fucking us over."